My name's Josh. I'm a co-host on The Imperfects, the son of Sri Lankan and English immigrants, and I grew up on and am now raising my children on Wurundjeri country. I'd like to recognise the traditional peoples of this continent whose land was stolen nearly 250 years ago. In particular, we at The Imperfects would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast was recorded, and we extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I'm inspired by the strength and endurance of the world's oldest living culture, and we at The Imperfects pay homage to the traditions of story when we share stories on our podcast.
Quick! Is anyone here a doctor? Yes, her name is Dr. Emily, and she's a psychologist. Please welcome to The Imperfects, our very own psychologist! The final Dr. Emisode of the year. Can you believe it?
Is it really?
Yeah.
This is it?
This is the number 8.
Oh, I feel quite sad.
Yeah. It is sad.
Will you come back next year, Em?
I would love to.
Probably should ask you that off air. Bit of an unfair situation to put you in.
You will have seen just a contract come through the email. If you could just sign that without reading it, that'd be great. And that's just for next year. Great. That's a standard 20-year contract. So just sign that. That would be great. Thanks. How are you, Em?
I'm very good. Yeah, really good.
Nice.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah, can't believe I've done 8. That feels very weird. But
And
yeah.
Well, you've done 7. About to.
Sorry,
right.
yes.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
And they're such popular episodes.
Yeah.
I had someone say to me the other day that they, it was a bit like I was saying to these guys earlier, so often after I do talks, like a guy, like men say to me, that actually wasn't too bad. I had someone say to me the other day, yeah, when you said you were going to have a psychologist once a month, I thought, I'll just have that week off. But I actually really like it.
Yeah. And it's that sort of glowing feedback that keeps us coming back. It's actually not so bad.
Oh, sorry, just to jump in quickly.
Oh, okay.
I think I sent it to you the other day. I found a photo of you and me at the Ball and Cinema in 1998.
Oh, jeez.
And we're standing near the popcorn machine or the till. And we just probably made 55 choc tops, which is 11 litres worth.
For those who don't know, Hugh and Em obviously worked together at the Ball and Cinema. And what year was that?
98, 99, 2000, 2001, I reckon. 2002.
What were the just to put it in our brains, like what were the hit movies of the times that you were there?
Well, when I started, it was my first shift where Em was looking after me was Notting Hill and Star Wars on the same night.
Star Wars Episode 1.
Yeah. I mean,
I was like, God, I knew you were old. You were in Star Wars. Yeah, that was the summer of 77, actually. It's my first shift.
Em, do you remember any big movies that just like...
Oh, the only thing I just remember having very lovely old people coming to see movies and confusing the titles. Like
Great.
Afternoon Tea with Mussolini. That was a good one. Or Spring Doors. Spring Doors.
Oh, the sliding doors.
Spring Doors.
That's a very fun memory, actually.
I think
there's some good ones.
I think I have told the story on this podcast about the old man who brought his choc top out halfway through a movie. And it was very quiet because it was halfway through the movie, but he brought it out and he presented it to me and he said, I can't seem to penetrate the surface of this shell. And he presented it to me and there were scratch marks all over the top because he'd been trying to get through with his teeth, but he couldn't get through. So we put it back in the bag and we smashed it on the bench for him. He walked off very happily. It was a cinema which was a thriving metropolis of elderly citizens, I would say, our cinema.
Sure was. Yeah, I suspect it probably still is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
We'll be there soon.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, it's a wonderful photo of you and me aged. It would have been 17 and 18. Well, if you're comfortable, then we can share it on social media if anyone cares.
Is this an era of Hugh Van Cuylenberg with blonde tips in the hair?
Oh, yeah. Very blonde.
Oh, good. It's one of the great HVC eras.
I think I might have even tried to pull it off as in, I'm just always in the sun. It's just like,
yeah. That's why you're always wearing zinc on your bottom lip. Yeah. It's like, it's just the bloody sun, not because I love cricket, just to the sun.
Anyway.
Oh, well, we could talk about the Ball and Cinema all day, but we mustn't. We must get to the Dr. Emisode. So today for the season finale of the Dr. Emisode, please don't give us any cliffhangers, but for the season finale, what would you like to talk about?
I thought we'd go back to 2021 and talk about Christian O'Connell's episode.
Yes.
And the clip that you'll hear in a minute is in reference, I think, Hugh, you'd asked a question of him when he moved to Australia from the UK.
For those that Christian O'Connell from the UK, big radio announcer, host, DJ, funny person, and then came to Australia and has the, I don't know about now, but at the time of the recording did have the number one breakfast radio show. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
So Hugh, you asked a question of him. I think it was actually quite specifically, how lonely did you feel, in terms of that move from the UK to Australia, and then he goes into explaining what that experience was like.
Yeah, to answer your question, when I moved here, it was one of those things. I suddenly got to Friday night when I would get my phone out and go, oh my God, this has been a tough week at work. Let me just call my mate Dave and we'll go for a beer or two. So I was, hang on a minute, I don't have a Dave. I don't have any friends here. I've got no listeners, no mates. And my wife is making friends really easily. She'd go for a dog walk, come back with 3 new phone numbers. Women are always recruiting for that sisterhood. Men are, especially in your mid-40s, you're tired, you're stretched, you don't have a lot of time to see your own friends, let alone start dating some new English guy. And so it was really hard. I was actually really lonely. And I remember once my wife and I shared a hairdresser, and I got to know him. We always got on really well. And one day he texted me saying, hey, I'm going out tonight with a couple of mates for some beers, why don't you come along? And I remember after 2 of the beers, I was having such a nice time. I said to him, hey, thanks for inviting me. And he went, it's okay, your wife said that you were lonely. And I remember going to the toilet and ringing my wife, going, why do you say this? She goes, but you are. Oh, yeah, but I haven't told you before about saying the truth. To another guy, don't say that.
So such a really, I thought, special share there. And the thing that I really wanted to talk about off the back of that was this experience of loneliness.
Yeah,
great.
And so I thought I'd just throw over to you guys first and get a sense of, even like taking a breath and noticing like loneliness. How does that resonate with you guys?
Oh, I mean, well, for me, I immediately think of when I was single for the first time in a long time. Like I was in a long-term relationship like through most of my 20s, and then when I became single for a couple of years, well, for like 3 or 4 years, I had lots of experiences of loneliness because for the first time in my adult life, I had times where I was just like by myself in my apartment and nothing to do, and trying to kind of catch up with people, but everyone's busy doing stuff, and then you start feeling like you're seeming desperate and you really want to see someone, but you don't want to like ask too many people, and you start feeling rejected. And that's what I think about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I actually thought about a time that when me and Soph lived in Bangladesh, and there was a really small expat community there, and I'd say certainly of our age group, it was like 80% women, and there was a couple of guys, but I realised it was the first time in my life I didn't really have mates. And I remember on my birthday that year, I had a job rurally in the country, and I just had the whole day by myself. And I remember sitting in this hotel by myself thinking, I've got no mates in this country and I have no one here for my birthday. And I remember thinking this is probably the loneliest I've been thus far in my life. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got 2 examples. So the first one is actually when I was setting up the Resilience Project. So I love belonging to groups and clubs and like sporting clubs, or just feeling like I'm part of a team. And the Resilience Project for 5 years was just me. And that always felt really lonely. Like you get to Friday and it was been a big week of work and you're just by yourself. And so that was one that I remember. There's a couple of times I tried to get a job just because I missed so much being part of a big group. So luckily I wasn't successful in getting those jobs. But then another time, coincidentally and quite ironically, Ryan, similar scenario to you, being single for the first time in 6 years in my sort of late 20s, early 30s. and very similar thing, just felt very lonely, and to the point where, well, the irony I was going to say was that I think we were experiencing the same thing, and we lived 100 metres away from each other, and we didn't know each other.
Well, I was living in a different place, but
Okay.
yeah, but I take your point.
Okay.
So I just needed to burst that balloon. Sorry.
Well and truly burst it. But my loneliness actually affected me in a way around that time where I didn't actually, I became more lonely because I didn't like, Monday nights we'd go and see mum and dad every single Monday night for dinner, and Josh and Soph would be there. And there's quite a few times I didn't go because I felt a little bit not ashamed. I just always felt this big expectation to make mum and dad happy all the time, and I could tell they were really sad that I was single and didn't have a partner, and I didn't want them to see me also feeling that way. So I wouldn't go quite a bit because I felt really
like pitied or something.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I felt bad that I felt like I was letting them down a bit by, all my mates were having kids and getting married and I wasn't, and that was a very lonely feeling when I was avoiding seeing mum and dad. Not all the time, but I did avoid a few times seeing them. So, which makes you even more lonely when you're avoiding your own family, I guess. Yeah. So yeah. Mm-hmm. So and I think loneliness, I think it's a great topic to do, because I reckon everyone, even there are people I know. A guy I've been talking to recently who has been with his partner for 15 years and is no longer feeling that connection. And he said, I have a partner for 15 years. I've never felt so lonely in my entire life. So, so yeah, I think this is not just for people who are single. This is for, I think everyone can resonate with the feeling of being alone by yourself, whether you are literally by yourself or not.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, all the examples that you've just given, I think are so relatable. But also really in some ways there's a whole lot of complexity to those experiences of loneliness. So it's not just one kind of like homogenous experience that I will feel lonely when I don't have a group of people around. There are so many different ways and different experiences of loneliness. And I think the thing that like just historically speaking, for a long time, I think we kind of conceptualize loneliness as like a unidimensional construct. So that it was just one loneliness. I'm lonely because I don't have people around me. But really kind of what we know now very clearly is that we can be surrounded by people and still feel loneliness. In terms of the research, there's kind of this distinction between what's called, or what you could call, emotional loneliness and social loneliness. And so emotional loneliness is conceptualized to result from a lack of attachment or lack of intimacy in a close relationship. So that's really kind of referencing obviously like your romantic partner, like having a romantic partner, or feeling as though you're lacking in kind of really quality relationships. And that can certainly be in terms of friendships or parents. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, that's even the experience of me being in my early 30s and my really good friends from school, all getting married and having kids, and they, we're still really good friends, but I just wasn't feeling a closeness, I guess, at that time. So yeah, that's I totally understand that.
Absolutely. So in that circumstance, Hugh, you're surrounded by friends and people, but there was a real yearning, or in some ways almost like an ache, for this sense of intimacy and closeness with one other person. So that's really kind of that emotional loneliness. We don't have this sense of being really seen or witnessed by another person. Social loneliness is a little bit different to that, and that is very much this kind of sense of there being a deficit in your social network. So what tends to show up here is that I feel like I don't have a community, or I don't have a sense of belonging. And so maybe kind of, Josh, the situation that you described, that sense like when you're away, that maybe it was more in that context, could have been more social loneliness. Yeah. Kind of the real missing of that kind of social network. How does that fit for your experience, do you think?
No, it's exactly that. And it was the first time in my life I'd taken for granted the social network that I had. And I realised, I don't have that ability to just be around a group of people and feel relaxed and like I've got a place to go almost. Like I've got a group. I know there's a place where my mates will be, or a group of males anyway. Like I had female friends and guys that I became friends with, but I just didn't have that feeling that, there's a place I feel like I belong here.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting too, because it's not just a physical place. It's like this real kind of like sense of I belong in some capacity somewhere with this group of people, and they could be anywhere.
Yeah.
But it's this sense of real belonging.
Yeah, you're right. It's funny. It's sort of physical, and it's like a physical belonging as much as it feels like it's a physical belonging, even though it's not attached to a certain physical place. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So in terms of the outcomes of kind of this experience of loneliness, what is interesting, and I think maybe sometimes important in just knowing, is that there is a higher impact for the experience of emotional loneliness than there is for social loneliness. So the kind of negative outcomes or consequences of having a chronic feeling of emotional loneliness is more detrimental to your well-being and to your health than social loneliness.
Gosh.
And we can kind of go into that a little bit more.
Because the first thing I think when you say that is I'm just trying to think back to times I felt lonely. And I reckon what comes with it, this might be just my personal experience, but like lacking in confidence.
Yeah.
I had the same feeling as you, Josh, when I was in India and by myself for long stretches of time. And I all of a sudden noticed I wasn't a very confident person. And so it's hard to attract a community or a group because you don't feel very confident. You're like, well, no one here cares about me. And that makes you lose confidence in yourself quite rapidly, I found.
Yeah. And I felt that I always thought, oh no, I'm a pretty confident person. But it's pretty earth-shattering to feel like, God, was it that fragile? Like was it dependent on that, those connections and that social feeling of belonging? And as soon as that's gone, nothing.
Yep.
Like the confidence just erodes with it.
That is so, the lack of confidence is so, like I really relate to that. And I remember that feeling in those years. But I still get that feeling now. Like it can happen, I feel like it can happen really quickly for me, where I'll be, I might have seen friends the last 3 or 4 days. And then if I have a couple of days of like, for whatever reason, if Jam's away or if I'm just by myself and I'm trying to connect with people, and I've got nothing to do and no one to see. And it is amazing now that I think about it. It doesn't take long for my confidence to quickly decline. And then someone will say like, hey, do you want to come to this thing? And I'll be like, oh, I kind of feel chosen again. Like it's like this special.
You're worthy again.
And it bounces back up. Like I feel like my confidence is actually quite fragile in terms of that.
And I'm sure it's a very common thing for when people are single and then dating. Like you need to have an element of confidence to go on dates. And then if you're not feeling confident going on a date, that can be quite difficult, especially when you're single for a long time and your friends sort of start to joke about the fact that, you're always single and like, but you go to the date feeling like a little bit of a joke and just no confidence. And so, I'm sure it's
But even not coming into the date with confidence, it's more just like presenting your best self.
Yes. Yeah.
It's hard to present your best self because you're feeling unworthy or
which then will increase your loneliness.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll come to that in terms of kind of, how to work with that in particular. But it's interesting too, even thinking about the distinction between, and this is so relevant for the last 2 years, the distinction between loneliness and isolation. Because, we can really actually be completely fine with being in isolation, with all things considered, and not feel loneliness, but we can obviously still feel very lonely even in the context of being surrounded by other people. The thing that I guess I actually don't know the research around this, and someone I'm sure can tell me otherwise, but the group of people that I would have been most concerned about during lockdowns were the people that were single on their own in their houses. So there's not only this absence of kind of like physical connection, a sense of intimacy with one other person, at least in the house, but there's also then not this capacity to be able to engage your social network in the same way either.
And also, I guess, like no at the time at least, no light at the end of the tunnel, like no knowledge of when that feeling was going to end or when we would be able to see people. That would have probably made it even harder.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would have struggled. I think it's Soph jokes about it because before we had kids, I don't reckon I would barely spend one night alone. Like, we had one of my best mates living next door, and if Soph was out, I would just basically invite myself around there to be around them because I've never been able to handle being alone for very long, and now it's not really much of an option anymore. But back then, it's a bit of a running joke in our relationship that I'm not good at being alone.
And we all have different kind of experiences of being alone, and some people have a great deal of comfort. I have a great deal of comfort being on their own, and it's completely manageable, whereas for others we need this kind of sense of being connected all the time. It is really interesting when we think about loneliness in terms of like as equivalent to a physiological need. So when we think about it, there being a deficit in a physiological need, that might be like I'm hungry or I'm thirsty. So we need food and water to survive. We can also think of the need to belong or the need to connect as in the same way that we think about a physiological need. But the interesting thing about loneliness is that it doesn't necessarily prompt the same kind of seeking out of resources that those physical cues of hunger and thirst do. So when we're hungry or we're thirsty, we seek out resources. But often with loneliness, even though it is this physiological and biological need to belong, we often don't necessarily seek out the action that would satiate that need.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, because it's like, and I was about to say you can't Uber Eats connection, but actually, even if I feel lonely, I'll still order a burger. But and weirdly, sometimes that does help. But I guess if you are feeling lonely by yourself and you get on one of the apps and you start and you're chatting with someone and then they come over in those situations, is that like how can that ever? Is that ever a satiation? If that's the word?
Yeah, look, I think it really depends upon the individual experiences and then what it is about, for example, having someone come over, and we can absolutely get to that.
You talking about like hooking up with people through an app?
Well, it's a bit crass, Hugh, but
I just didn't know.
Yeah, that is what I meant.
Oh,
yeah. Well, actually, not even necessarily. I just mean like connecting with a stranger, and then half an hour later they're coming over. You might not hook up with them, but but the intention is romantic.
Yeah. And I think that's where the real danger comes up in terms of the experience of loneliness. Is for me, one of kind of two things can happen, is that we will seek out any connection, and that may then lead us to have or to engage in relationships that actually aren't really meaningful, or they're relationships where the value, like we don't share similar values. So there can be that experience that we'll just take, really kind of whatever will show up. Or what really often happens is that when we feel lonely, it really kind of in a contradictory way leads us to withdraw even more. Because if we think about this, it's a strange thing, this experience of loneliness, that it often seems to come with a very strong feeling of shame. Yeah. It is shameful that I am experiencing loneliness or I am lonely. Does that resonate at all?
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's sort of like the feeling of being the one without a chair when the music stops in musical chairs, the odd one out that doesn't belong in the group anymore, but it's like on steroids. It's but like you don't feel shameful for feeling thirsty, but
I'd feel. But when people joke, like my friends joke and Soph and mates, that I'm not good at being alone, that I feel that that's a shameful thing. Like that's something wrong with me, that I don't feel good being alone and I need to seek out connection really quickly. And I categorize that in my mind as that's a weakness or a bad thing. And there's that shame attached to it.
Yeah. I remember a feeling of one of my best mates got married on New Year's Eve, years and years and years ago. I don't know, maybe 8-9 years ago, and he got married at the MCG, and there were fireworks happening over the city, and everyone was staying there. Everyone
just a low-key wedding. Fireworks at the MCG on New Year's Eve. Gee, that's quite the wedding.
Well, yeah, I just realised as I said that. Yeah, it sounds like it's quite. There weren't 100,000 people at the wedding.
Yeah,
he is the MCC, so it was kind of anyway. That's he's very good at cricket, and that's why he got the MCG for his wedding.
Yeah.
And I remember I was the only single person out of everyone there, pretty much, and everyone was watching the fireworks, and I'm standing by myself. All the couples are staying together, like because it was New Year's Eve, like hugging and kissing and stuff. And then I remember really good mates of mine, Maddie, who works at the Resilience Project now, and her husband Tom. I remember I just looked across and they were just looking at me like really lovingly, but just like, poor Hugh. and I felt really, and they were doing it in such a lovely way, but I felt like, it was a very shameful feeling of like, I'm very much by myself here. And I hadn't sort of noticed it until you could see other people feeling sorry for me. So yeah, I think and I was like,
Was it them feeling sorry for you, or was it your perception that they were feeling sorry for you?
I think the look was like, he's standing by himself. No, that's right. No, they very awkwardly came and stood near me just so
and they said, we feel sorry for you.
No, they just came and stood. That's right. They just came and stood right next to me because they didn't want me to feel like, they're such lovely people. I didn't want to feel like I was by myself. But I remember thinking, I must look lonely, and that felt quite shameful. Yeah. Just to be clear, I know Maddie listens to this. So Maddie, what you did was lovely.
But it even comes back to what Christian was mentioning around the fact that when he felt lonely, he didn't tell his mates back home that that's what his experience was, because it brings with it this sense of shame that somehow. It's kind of really linked to this notion that somehow I'm deficient in my capacity to make connections. And so we don't want to share with other people that actually I'm feeling pretty lonely at the moment, because that feels too shameful.
I wouldn't. Everything we know and everything we talk about in this podcast, I still, in the future, if I went through a patch of being lonely, I don't reckon I'd tell anyone. It'd be a very hard thing to say. Everyone, I feel lonely. Very hard.
Yeah, it is a weird thing to say.
Also because I don't know what to do with that information once you tell me.
Oh, yeah.
Spend more time with it.
Yeah, but like you could say, but as Em said, like you could be spending a lot of time around the person and they still feel lonely. And then you're like, well, aren't we hanging out?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, yeah. So, yeah.
Which is different to the Christian O'Connell example that you just made then. But yeah.
But I think that's interesting too in terms of the listener. You know, if you hear someone say, I'm feeling lonely, what happens in that moment?
This.
What do you mean, Em? When someone says they're lonely?
So even just kind of imagining for a moment, like you have a friend that says, oh, look, actually, to be honest, I've been feeling pretty lonely lately. I mean, how does that feel to you guys to hear that?
Well, I mean, my instant reaction is like, oh, I feel then guilty. I feel like it's like me not doing enough. Like I feel like it's almost like, of course I'm just making it about me, but I'm hearing it as I'm not doing enough to make you feel not lonely or to help out with the loneliness. And so I immediately think like, oh shit, I should be doing more in this relationship. This is horrible that my friend is feeling lonely and I didn't know, and maybe I could be doing more. And that's how I react. Yeah.
I feel like I'd want to organise events for them to be like, but that probably isn't. I don't know. Probably wouldn't help.
Especially if it's emotional loneliness. I'm guessing, Emma, you were saying before, emotional loneliness is not. You can still be doing plenty of stuff with people, be in a romantic relationship, and still feel lonely. So,
I mean, now that I've had time to think about it, I think what I would hope that I would do is you just sort of like ask questions and listen and be non-judgmental, I guess, because I guess they're just wanting someone that will understand them
to connect with them
and not try and fix their problem. Yeah.
And this is the thing, is like in that moment of you being able to articulate, I'm feeling lonely, we've already kind of opened ourselves up to being present with that feeling, and there's lots to be said about that. But I'm not sure if you recall in I think a previous couple of episodes ago with noticing and naming emotion, being able to label it. You know, if we can actually physically articulate, I'm noticing I'm feeling lonely, not only have we used that kind of part of the brain that dampens down the threat center, we're articulating it, we're verbalizing it, we're externalizing it in some way. But in addition to being able to notice and to label it, we've also created a connection with that other person. And what's happening there in that very moment of you saying, I'm feeling lonely, is that you have undermined that shame. Because shame, like as we know, breeds in secrecy and in silence. So the moment you speak it, not only am I using this frontal part of my brain, but I'm also, if I'm really paying attention, I'm having a moment of being seen by someone else. And that is the way that we work with that feeling.
So you're saying now it is extremely important to tell people?
Yeah.
If you can,
yes,
because I still don't know if I'd do it.
So there's that part of it, and then as the receiver of the information, what is the right thing to say, or what is the best way to react?
So, you know, for me, this could be the expression of any kind of pain or discomfort is really validating that for them. Not moving into problem solving, you know, which is so normal. You know, when we hear someone saying like, I've got a problem with my shoe. Well, let's fix the shoe. This is not, it's not a problem to be solved. This is an emotion for us to be able to hold really and to support. So when someone says, you know, I'm feeling really lonely, you know, the best thing we can do is say like, man, that must feel really tough. You know, that feels really hard. You know, kind of really providing the sense of normalizing and validating that other person's expression. And then we can move into, okay, so like, well, what can we do about this? You know, what do you need from me in this moment or going forward? Is there something different I could be doing in our relationship, for example?
So then by the time you've said that, so when you said, what do you need from me? By that stage, you've already validated their emotion. You've already kind of allowed them and accepted what they've said. And so hopefully the person who feels lonely then feels like they're in a place that's safe, and they feel like they can honestly say what they need, and they feel like they're gonna be heard.
Yeah. And look, to be honest, in many circumstances, people are like, you don't need to do anything. Actually, this is what's making me feel better, is actually just being able to say, it's like a weight is lifted off when I can just acknowledge that, you know, I've been feeling lonely. But this moment is important to me, that I can, you know, I really express this to you, and this tells me this is an important relationship in my life.
It also sounds to me like, because you're saying that the connection is sort of the antidote to the shame, but also the very act of doing this is having a genuine conversation with someone, which is sort of the opposite of loneliness. Like you're actually enacting that connection. It's sort of, it's beginning. It's
spot on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. And the thing about loneliness is that it's actually a feeling state. So it's not a permanent state of being. And if we think about it in terms of feelings come and go, loneliness feelings also come and go. So does that make sense?
Yeah,
saying that?
definitely.
Yep.
Definitely.
This too shall pass.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. But we have to be able to pay attention to when it's here and also when it's not here. And that can kind of move us into a whole other, you know, like whole other realms, for example, of gratitude and paying attention to the good, which I can explore a little bit more in a minute.
Do it now.
Okay.
No, just before you do. Just before you do that.
I can't wait a minute.
Before you do that, so for anyone who feels lonely, anyone listening right now who feels lonely, the most important thing for them to do is to acknowledge it to themselves, to start off with. Just say to themselves, like, yeah, I definitely feel that at the moment. Yep. And then try and find the courage to tell someone that they trust.
Mm-hmm.
And
so I actually, sorry, keep going.
No, you what you're about to say is better.
So I feel like I haven't been highly organised in my, I was going to say sessions, but they're not sessions, in my episodes with you guys. And so I've written down some things in terms of like having a plan about how, you know, you can kind of approach this potentially, because I know a lot of people really resonate with like step processes and stuff. So at least in my mind, sometimes it's useful to have a framework about how we can deal with, in essence, what we're talking about is an uncomfortable feeling. So like for me, the first thing, and Hugh, you've already said it, is the first thing is picking up on the fact that I'm feeling lonely. So it might be something like asking yourself, what am I feeling right now? And maybe there's like an ache in the body, like, or even just like, again, like I mentioned before, this kind of like aching in the heart, like a real, you can almost like literally feel the physical sensations of feeling lonely. So the first thing is opening up and being present to this. And then for me, certainly the next thing is let's really bring some validation and self-compassion to this. So we can use this noticing language. So like, I'm noticing I'm having a tough time with loneliness today or in this moment. Or it might be even that you're like, for example, you're at an event and you notice that there are lots of couples around and you really feel this pang of loneliness. And so it might just be pausing, taking a breath, noticing I'm feeling loneliness. And then we can extend a sense of self-compassion to that. So it might be saying something like, Em, like, it's understandable. You feel lonely. Of course you do. And, this is pretty tough. Slowing things down a little. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're the first two things.
So
being
the first
present.
one, being present and picking up on it. And the second one is
like
validation.
Forgiving yourself for feeling that way. Or,
And validation and self-compassion.
Yep.
So really saying this is understandable that you're feeling lonely. Because the loneliness signals something, and the loneliness is signaling that there is a gap between where you are and where you want to be, really.
Yeah.
And then the next one is taking action. And what's interesting about loneliness, and I've kind of alluded to this already, is it can be likened to an experience of depression or low mood. And what's interesting about that feeling state is it brings with it an action urge. Now, an action urge is an urge to behave in a certain way in response to a feeling. So when we feel sad, the action urge often is to withdraw. When we feel anxious, often the action urge is to withdraw also. When we feel happiness, the action urge is often to be active. Okay. So when it comes to working with depression, and in this instance, loneliness, we have to, this is going to sound weird, we have to act better to feel better. So the urge that shows up is that we will want to, for example, not go to that social event because I will only be exposed to feelings of loneliness. Or it might be, for example, I don't want to speak to my partner about feeling lonely because that will only just exacerbate or reinforce the fact that I feel lonely. Okay. So the action urge that comes with loneliness usually is to withdraw or to, I guess, have inaction. Okay.
Yeah, that it reminds me in those years of my singledom, which sounds like it would be fun and like out there and being single, but no, it was a lot of withdrawing, a lot of like being by myself, and I gave myself a rule that if anyone ever like asked me to do anything, I have to say yes. It was like this, say yes attitude that I adopted, and that would often mean it would get to like 10 p.m. and I'm by myself in my apartment and I've like given up on seeing anyone that night, and I'm like, oh well, I guess I'm just by myself again. Get into my sleeping clothes, otherwise known as pajamas. My sleeping clothes. I'm like, my head is. I'm going to bed. I'm done for the day. But then I'll get a text message and someone will say, "Oh, where are you at the moment? We're at so and so bar," and I'm like, "Okay, well, I do not feel my." Action urge, is that right? Action. My action urge is to withdraw and to say no because I feel lonely and I don't want to see anyone because for whatever reason, for all those reasons. So, but I would have to go. And every time and so I can't believe it. And so what I would do is I'd get dressed, go out and meet them and be there at like 11 o'clock and pretend like I'd been out all night. Oh, hey. Like for them, it's like, oh, I felt like this kind of loser at home who was doing nothing while they've been out all night with friends, and I'd arrive at that time pretending. But the point being is that as soon as I got there and I was around people, I felt great. I felt so good and like changed it completely shifted my whole mindset.
Yeah. And that's exactly it, is that we have to actually take the action before we feel the feeling. And a really common example of this in terms of motivation is, for example, starting an exercise regime or starting to exercise in general. Often we feel like we have to wait to feel motivated in order to go. But what we know is that we need to actually do the action before the motivation arrives. So the motivation arrives after we've done the exercise, not before.
Follow your routine, not your mood.
Oh,
Yep.
That's good.
So this is the same when it comes to the experience of loneliness, is that if we wait to feel better, to connect with people, we will only reinforce this low mood.
Oh, that's so helpful. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the taking action is really, really important when it comes to loneliness, and taking action means making efforts towards connection. And so even if it's just a small thing, maybe it's even a phone call to someone, it's this heading this like in a direction towards connection rather than withdrawing to keep myself safe from further disappointment or further rejection.
That is great.
It's so good. I'd never heard of action urge before, and it's even being aware of that's a really good thing to know, I reckon, for people, just to understand in a moment of loneliness and people are doing stuff, they go, no, I'll just stay at home, to go, oh, this is my action urge, but I need to act well to be well. So that's so good, Em. I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's acknowledging, when like opportunities come by, and sometimes you have there's like a fork in the road where you're like, oh, will I do that or will I not? And the people who often are very successful in what they do is the people who take the opportunities, they're prepared for the opportunities, or they're willing to take a risk and be a little bit vulnerable and try something. And more often than not, it leads to an interesting, maybe not always great, but more often than not, it leads, like you learn something from it and grow in some way. It's like that. It's like, not letting your mood, in like how you said, Hugh, don't let your mood rule your decision. Yeah,
it's been a really.
Absolutely.
I hate to do. I feel like I do it way too often on this podcast, but like I just have learnt so much through running, and so often you get out of bed and go, I don't feel like it, and your mood will say don't do it. But if you follow a routine, not your mood, then you just go and do it, and then by the time you start, you're like, this is the best thing ever. I love this so much. So I think it's been a great lesson for life that I've learnt through running. That like there are things that you don't want to do, but once you start doing them, then you will be happy you're doing them. And I think that that speaks to me around action urge and acting well to be well. I love that so much.
Yeah. And that to me also then really links into or ties into values, which, I know has been kind of like an undercurrent of lots of the episodes that you guys are doing too. But if we think about loneliness, what often happens is that it feels like it's stopping me from connecting with my values. And a really good example of this is, let's just say you feel like you're really aching or yearning for a partner, and that's creating this sense of loneliness that's here. And so that loneliness says, well, I can't go out and do the things that I'd like to do because I don't have a partner. Really great example. For example, I would love to go traveling, but I don't have a partner, so I can't go and do that. That's a very common kind of thing. Or I wanted to go to that event, but I don't have a group of close friends that I can do that with. And the question is, like, actually, can you open up and stay with the feelings of being on your own, but still pursue the things that create kind of meaning and purpose in your life? And so the values are like heading west. We never actually reach west, but it's an ongoing direction that you can keep following. So am I making sense there? I'm just like looking at your faces.
Yes. Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
we should have made some
Yeah.
kind of noise to
Yes.
validate. We said yes, definitely,
Yes.
definitely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Okay. So I guess what I'm saying is, despite feeling lonely, we can still connect with and engage with our values. And so part of this process might actually just be uncovering, well, what are my values? And sometimes that's an interesting distinction between what are values and what are goals. The easiest way for me to kind of explain that is that if a value is like heading west, it's an ongoing action that we can never tick off. We can never reach west. But a goal might be heading to the top of the mountain in order to keep heading west. So we can tick off that I've climbed the mountain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So what often we can get really confused with is that I really value being married. Well, being married isn't a value. Or I really want to be married. That's a goal, actually. But what sits underneath that? So what are the values that sit underneath having a partner? What are the values that sit underneath being married? And if we can connect to that, they are things that we can do irrespective of having a partner.
Yeah.
So do you mean
So
like a value might be loyalty and like connection or maybe
treating people with kindness or like
yeah. So you
Yeah,
can still
yep.
do those things regardless of whether or not you're married. You can still be loyal to friends and loyal to
Yeah.
the people in your life.
Yeah.
You can
So
still,
if
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you chose those two as values, for example, kindness and loyalty, is that, okay, well, let's think about those two. How do I act consistently with those two values in my life right now? And often when loneliness or depression shows up, it really disconnects us from the behaviours of those values. So if we can pause and slow down enough and really connect with what's truly important to me in my life, like when I look back on my life, if I'm lucky enough to get to old age, how is it that I wanted to have lived my life? And in actual fact, we don't need to have a partner to still be able to practice being loyal or to be able to practice being kind. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah,
Such
absolutely.
an incredible
Yeah.
point.
And so the question then is, okay, well, let's really think about this. You know, how can I really show up to these values of loyalty and kindness? And maybe it might be other things. So maybe it might be, you know, today I'm going to go and spend some time with my grandparents or spend some time with my parents and really show up in a kindly way.
Yeah. And I guess the incredible thing with that is that you always have even if it feels like you don't, you always have the ability to try and connect with those values, even if you don't have the ability to connect with a person or a group of people. Yeah.
Absolutely. It just takes a little bit more thinking to work out, you know, how can I move my feet basically towards that valued direction? Like in terms of actually genuinely combating on a very practical basis, combating loneliness, one of the greatest things to do is contribution and volunteering. So if you're, you know, lacking in a sense of kind of connection to others, getting out there and being able to contribute has this really powerful effect of creating a sense of community and connection.
So at the time of recording, we're kind of like sort of quickly approaching the festive season, which is sort of like generally known like as like if you're a person who feels lonely, that's a terrifying time. Like, you know, for some people, it's really exciting. Oh, I get to go to Christmas parties, get to go to see family, get to do all this. But for someone who feels lonely, feels depressed, and doesn't like these social interactions and fears them to a certain degree, like how should we, either as a lonely person or as a person who maybe knows a lonely person, how do we approach this time of the year?
Yeah. I think that's such an appropriate question because that's a really tough time. And I think that is really the first thing in there is, again, like really opening up and owning, you know, that this feels hard for me, or that, you know, again, extending a sense of self-compassion, like, of course this feels hard. You know, you really want to have a partner or you want to have a closer group of people in your life. So that that first part, pausing, taking a breath and acknowledging and providing that sense of self-compassion for this difficulty that's here. But then the next thing is, okay, well, this is a hard time for me. How can I better connect with my values and that value direction again? And so maybe around that Christmas time, maybe it's doing things like, well, how can I go out there and show kindness to other people?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we do the action that like we're kind of doing what we want to get, but we're giving it to other people.
Yeah.
That's the most disconnected I've ever been from my values is when I was single, I reckon. Like it was, I felt like it was a very selfish time in my life, very selfish, the way I acted. And so I've only just realised that just listening to you speak then, but it's so true what you say, like that, not for everyone who's going through it, but for me, certainly, I
Like in what way do you reckon?
just everything was about, like, because I felt lonely, I just did everything for myself to try and feel good or if I went and hung out with a group of people, I talked about myself a lot or like what I'd been up to and didn't listen as much as maybe I usually would like to think I do. Or
Do you think there's an element of, well, if you're not going to involve me, I won't involve you. I won't even try. Do you reckon there's any of that going on?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I was worried that people felt sorry for me, so I tried to put on an act that like, they don't feel sorry for me. I'm fine, mate. I'm like, things are great. And so I just talk about myself a lot or like just do what I wanted to do. It's like, yeah, I'm single. I can do whatever I want. It's up to me. Like, this is great. I get to do, what I want whenever I want to. And that's that. But
did you have blonde tips when you were single, just out of interest? Because this might have been your problem.
No, but I think I would have loved to have someone to have said to me back then, like, one of the issues you're having right now is you're a long way away from what you the person you would like to see yourself as. So just get back to that very quickly and you'll feel a lot better. And it's not saying everyone who's single or feels lonely is being selfish, but that's certainly, if I look back on my life, that's a period where I certainly acted very selfishly, I think.
I have a story to tell that is like I don't know if it's appropriate also. We could cut it out because it might not link to this at all, but it just is like a one-day thing that happened to me when I was 19. I was on my way to uni and I saw there was Australian Idol auditions going on and I thought, I'm going to give it a crack. I'm going to try it for Australian Idol. And so at the tennis centre in 2005, I reckon, so early Idol.
Whoa.
Yeah, maybe the second year.
Yeah.
Yeah. And or third year or something.
Yeah.
And I went there and I got in the queue. The queue was signed up, got all the forms. The queue was massive. And
With no preparation. You didn't know what you were going to sing or anything?
Well, Josh, just a bit of context, you're an unbelievably good singer and musician.
not really.
And at that time you were playing a bit like
I
at
was singing
pubs
I sung at a pub once a week. So I just thought I'll sing something from what I sing at a pub.
Yeah.
And I hated, like I felt incredibly lonely because I got in this queue and there were so many people just who were not like me at all, very like showy, very insecure probably people who were performing to everyone in the space. There was literal like sing-offs going on in the queue and I just felt I hated it. And I was there for probably about an hour and like went into the bathroom and there were these guys like singing at each other in the mirror and it was this really...
Wow, it sounds like a movie. It sounds like High School Musical.
Yeah, it was just like that. And I the longer I was there, the more I felt lonely and isolated and like, this is not my crowd. This is not, I was hating everything. And I found someone's wallet on the ground and I thought, I'm going to do whatever I can to return this wallet to this person. And so I grabbed the wallet and I went to the like tennis center management. I spent like 3 hours trying to locate this person, managed to find the person and give them their wallet
Has anyone
back.
seen a Mark Holden? I've got someone called Mark Holden's wallet. It says touchdown on the front.
And the more I worked harder to try and locate this person, the better I started to feel, and it kind of got me out of this trap of feeling really crap. And then I got the wallet back to the person. I left that day feeling so good. Didn't try out. Like I sort of realised pretty quickly I didn't want to do that. But I left the day feeling so great, like in a really
amazing.
good way.
Yeah.
Is that like a one day inaction of exactly what you're talking about?
Yep, 100%. Do you have a sense, Josh, of what value you connected with there that was important to you?
I think A kind of selfless kindness, I think.
Mm.
Because I felt like I saw selfishness and self-centeredness reflected at me everywhere I was looking, and I thought, I found this. I've got an opportunity to give back to someone here, taking out however long it takes, and not progress a selfish, self-centered goal, which would be to get onto Australian Idol. So it was like the opposite of what everyone there was trying to do. So I thought it was probably me being smug as well, like trying to be sort of pat myself on the back and go, "No, you're better than these guys." But but it's I think it was trying to connect with that instead.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. Yeah.
Just as a side note, one of the song that Josh would finish his set with was "Free Love" on the Free Love.
No,
Free Love. Yeah.
a Brent original.
Yeah.
Really, the pub loved it. It would really
That
get
is so good.
Yeah.
From The Office.
10 o'clock on a Friday night.
Oh,
Glen Ferry.
like, would you sing it sincerely?
Yeah.
Beautiful. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Oh, I would love to see a video of that so
Probably
much.
won't.
Sorry.
Won't exist. Yeah.
No, I think that's a beautiful example. How, we have opportunity and we have moments to be able to connect with what we value. And look, to be honest, uncovering values is a whole other piece of work. So you might even just, like, in terms of starting that process, even just Googling list of values and seeing what comes up in terms of that. And because we all have different values. And it's really important that we're not idealizing, some over others or anything like that. But this process is really around checking with, like, well, how is it that me, want to live in my world? How do I want to live going forward? And if we can engage in the actions that support those values, that's what creates that kind of greater sense of meaning and purpose, and like a richer life, really.
Amazing.
So good, Em. It's just I haven't heard loneliness talked about like this before, like a set of actionable, like to-do list kind of thing, which I think is great. But the thing you said you'd speak about before is gratitude as well. And I do like gratitude stuff, so please continue.
So yes, absolutely. This is for me a really important part of working with this feeling state. And in previous episodes, we've spoken about those, particularly in reference to that rejection sensitivity dynamic, whether we can actually bring greater awareness to those micro moments of connection. And gratitude shows up in a way that we can pay attention to the moments of connection that I am having. So, for example, when you get to the end of your day, even if you are kind of keeping a gratitude journal, is really to be able to pause and to slow down and to really kind of remember how that felt to feel connected, even just for a moment. Mm-hmm. An example that actually comes to mind is, there are so many different circumstances in which we can feel lonely. But for me, and I assume this is kind of normal, but like having little kids, like having babies and infants, is a time I think that we can really get exposed to a lot of loneliness and isolation. And my husband and I were talking about getting a coffee machine, and I don't want a coffee machine. And the reason why is because, to me, going out with the baby to get a coffee and to talk to the coffee person was the moment that I could feel like I had a sense of connection with someone else other than this non-speaking infant. So what feels really important is that, like, so maybe I don't have access to a really big group of friends at the moment, or maybe I don't have even necessarily a sense of a quality, close relationship, but how can I really pay attention to those moments of being with other people in the world? And maybe that is pausing, slowing down and noticing I had this interaction with my barista this morning, and I asked them a question about, how their day was going. And if we can pause long enough, we can notice that here I am in the presence of someone else, and that is a moment that undermines loneliness, even just for a second.
Yeah. I read something the other day about, and there was a term for it, and I wish I could remember it. Maybe you know it, Em, but those interactions that we have with either the barista or someone at a shop, people that you see kind of regularly in your neighborhood, they're not actual like friends, but they're kind of they're relationships that you have. But this article I was reading was saying how important they are, because if you don't have I guess the pandemic got rid of a lot of those, but just by having these regular interactions with people, and even if it's just to kind of hear like, oh, there's this movie that this person told me I should go see, or like getting advice, but not deep connections. They're just like they're lightweight connections. Yeah,
That was Oliver Berkman.
Was it really?
Yeah, he talks about
Well, there you go.
they're like your little interaction when you go to pick up your Chinese food from a takeaway and you just say g'day to the person, maybe say 3 words and go home. He said that those micro connections, those micro little fibers multiplied out over a whole community is what binds communities together.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And that's that antidote to this sense of social loneliness. But what it requires you to do, though, is to pay attention to it, because otherwise they just slip off. Those experiences become, it's almost like they never happened. So this is, again, kind of that invitation to notice or to practice gratitude, is to feel a sense of warmth, a sense of presence with someone. Like, here was a moment where I was able to smile with someone else. And so really practicing being able to pay attention to those moments becomes a really big buffer to a more pervasive feeling of loneliness.
There's a lovely quote that I'm thinking of by a guy, I don't really know who he is. He's a singer-songwriter, Henry Rollins, who writes for the Rolling Stone, and it is... I took a screen. Hang on, wait a minute. Just keep talking, guys. I'm going to get my phone and I'm going to tell you what it is, because it's really good. It'll promise it'll be worth it. Hang on.
Okay, no, we'll just pad for a bit. For some reason, we are not going to edit this bit. We're just padding while Hugh comes back.
I'll sing Free Love Freeway. Little girl on a little Cadillac.
Stop before I have to pay for it. Hugh, how you going? Oh, you've got it.
So here it is. Henry Rollins. Loneliness adds beauty to life. It puts a special burn on sunset and makes night air smell better. And I feel like that's a kind of a nod to what you were just saying there, like about really loneliness can get you to pay attention to it. Kind of forces you to go, there's other good stuff out there and I need to pay attention to it, whether it's the night air or the sunset or whatever it is. So was that worth it? I'm not sure it was.
Absolutely.
No, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think, that's beautiful. And I think that's very, very true. And I guess even just kind of tying up all of this stuff is that, if we can open up to what's already here and be kind to ourselves when it is, then we can move towards that kind of valued direction.
Yeah.
In essence, I think. Yeah.
Just awesome, Em. Thank you so much. And thank you for the year, for 8 amazing episodes. I mean, I just never thought, like when we started the podcast, I just never really imagined that we would be so professional, that we would have a proper professional clinical psychologist on regularly to say incredible things.
I think it's also worth mentioning, you've never done anything like this before. You've just jumped on and just provided 8 phenomenal episodes that have been so helpful to people, and amongst our most popular episodes as well. Someone sent me a message the other day saying listening to the Dr. Emisode always leaves me feeling zen, and I thought that's very good. Very good. So thanks for making us feel zen all year, Em. It's been so lovely to learn from you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a really amazing experience.
I've noticed also people can follow you at Dr. Emily Musgrove on Instagram as well. I've noticed you've just started
I'm not a prolific poster, so I hope people don't get disappointed when there's not much on it.
Let me just say, got to be careful on that social media. It can be a little bit addictive. I'm sure you'll be fine. Not a big thing to worry about, but just keep an eye on that.
I'll send you that photo from the Bourne Cinema and you can post that if you like.
That'll get some serious traction.
Oh, good Lord.
Yeah, and remember the more likes and comments you get, the better you are. Just remember.
Thanks so much, Em. You're amazing.
I'll see you all soon.
We'll see you next year.
See ya.
Hugh, it's Ryan. Hey, I just realised that in this episode we didn't actually mention the Imperfects live tour at all. I mean, obviously because we recorded this episode a few weeks before the announcement, so we couldn't talk about it then. But I don't know, I just wondered whether we should put something at the end of the ep or something that at least references the tour. I mean, even if I did one of those, I did like a voicemail or something. If we did one of those voicemails at the end of the ep of me leaving a voicemail for you, and somehow organically put in the sentence, tickets for the live tour are on sale now at livenation.com.au, but get in quick because tickets are selling fast. I don't know. Seems a bit heavy-handed. It might be too obvious, but I don't know what else to do. I mean, it'd be a good opportunity to thank all the people as well who've already bought tickets because, I mean, as you know, tickets are selling way faster than we expected, and I'm just worried people will miss out if they're not reminded. So anyway, let me know if you think that will work. Otherwise, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Thanks, mate. It's Ryan Shelton, by the way, from the podcast.
To call back, press 22. To replay message, press 1.
If this episode has been triggering for you, we strongly recommend Lifeline on 131114. The Imperfects is hosted and co-produced by Hugh Van Cuylenberg, Ryan Shelton and Josh Van Cuylenberg. This episode was produced by Bridget Northeast, edited by Jamison Moore, filmed by Andy Poole and social mediaed by George Martin. A special thanks to Dr. M for her expertise and guidance. We'd also like to thank the Resilience Project for their ongoing support.